watching via Zoom. Everybody gets PowerPointed to death. You and I are just going to have a conversation just like we're walking the quad, right?
Absolutely.
Well, so looking forward to it.
We've got a lot to talk about this afternoon. I want to make sure that we get to everything we have on our plate here. So I want to go ahead and jump right in. By now, most people know Dr. Layton, can identify you from your role, your former role in the Secret Service, but I want to take some time to get to know you a little bit more in depth, learn a little bit more about your experience prior to the Secret Service. So can you tell us a little bit about who you were prior to attending Central, Ron Layton as the student at Central Catholic, and really what you did after graduating from Central up until joining the Secret Service?
Yeah, sure. So like many folks that went to Central, I mean, I was a neighborhood kid, bounced around a little bit, grew up in Homewood, North Side, East Liberty, Oakland, and just like a lot of other kids that we all went to school with. So, started martial arts very early at about 8 years old. And I went to Carlo up to 6th grade, and went to St. Paul's and then to Central. And I'm thinking about some of those early experiences. Number one, I was going to try, I say I was going to try, I didn't have anything to do with it. But my mom and Graham were going to try to get me into St. Agnes. They didn't let me in because I couldn't draw. So, and guess what? I still can't draw. So Graham was a beautician, and she owned a beauty shop where she had a lot of clients. And what ends up happening is, in those environments, she became a person of influence, and St. Agnes didn't work out. Carlo did. Carlo went to 6th, and I went to St. Paul's for a couple of years, and then to Central. And I'm thinking about, the topic that we're going to discuss today, technology and all that other kind of stuff. I can remember being in the 6th grade, maybe the 7th grade, and my mom and stepdad getting a TRS-80 computer. So I'm hoping that there's some people watching that remember what that big brick was. But I remember tearing that thing open and looking at the manual, hooking everything together, and teaching myself this language called BASIC. You look at the manual, you type it in, and then guess what? It shows up on the computer screen. What a great thing. Well, those are kind of some of the early developmental things that helped me moving through a career. Obviously you've got an interest in that kind of stuff. And, learning is a very interesting thing. You do a little bit, then you find out, hey, what happens if I do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more? And I can remember, I think by the time I was in, a year or something like that, screwing around with this thing, there was an assignment that I had in grade school that I just looked at and went, I don't want to do it that way. I think I want to write a computer program, because now I knew how to do that. And I just looked at it like a little differently. And I can remember submitting a computer program in the 7th or 8th grade or something like that. And aside from the teacher looking at me like I had 3 heads, that kind of a thing, that kind of problem solving approach is kind of the foundation that took me through a lot of my Secret Service career and into the private sector. And what I want to try to do in this conversation is weave certain leadership principles inside the conversation. So, as a 6th or a 7th grader, this was probably, especially during this time, this was probably seen as kind of an oddball thing to do, right? Particularly because I didn't want to do it the way that I was told to do it. But my point is that one of the things that we're finding in leadership, particularly with the influence of technology, is that leaders have to find a way to make room for non-traditional thinkers without ostracizing them. Because a lot of times that's how innovation, that's how it happens. Somebody just does it just a little bit different, and it turns out to make all the difference. So I'm going to consistently go back to technology and leadership and that kind of stuff. But in retrospect, that's one of the ways that it started with me. And I thought that was just something that I wanted to bring up. And I think we want to transition into, what happened, like how you, any of that stuff into the Secret Service. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you'd mentioned, an interest in technology early on from a young age. How did that continue to develop while you were at Central Catholic, and then beyond Central Catholic into your early years of college and then after?
Yeah, so I think what happens is I always knew that I wanted to go to school for engineering. And when I think about it, I was the kid that took radios apart. You can remember the Buell Science Center. I remember going over there, learning how to build a shortwave radio, and just the tinkerer that take stuff apart, learning how to solder stuff. What's that little thing there? Oh, that's a resistor. I mean, guess what? That's what young engineering students, that's what they do. It's an odd mix when you're going into college to try to converge an engineering degree and football. It's a bit of an odd thing. And I think, I'm sure that I could have gone to school to play football a lot of places. I got recruited by Navy, and I can remember the Navy recruiter going, "Hey, you're going to get a great engineering program here, and we play football on television all the time, and you owe us 6 years after you got to work for the government for 6 years after you get out." And I'm thinking, 6 years? Who the hell wants to work for the government for 6 years after they get out of school? Well, this guy ended up doing it. Just shows you how unusual life can be. But what ended up happening is when I get out of school, remember I told you about martial arts? I end up meeting a lot of police officers as a result of that kind of stuff. And what ends up happening is I meet a guy who was a sergeant at Pitt who later became the chief at Chatham. And I had kept up a relationship with him, and he goes, "Hey, I'm going to send you to the police academy in the summer, and then when you get back on school break, I'll hire you part-time." So what ended up happening is, to fast forward this story, what ends up happening is I like that kind of work, but by now I had gotten my engineering degree, and I end up doing a couple of other things. I'm an electrical engineer for an automation and controls company out in Greentree. So I end up working the university police job at night, taking that uniform off, and then being an engineer by day. So another thing, if you think about it, like I kind of took that attitude with me into the Secret Service, the whole like law enforcement and technology thing, and tried to smash those together. And what ended up happening is I met a Secret Service agent, in essence, through the law enforcement contact, that said, "Hey, did you ever think about us?" And I went, "No, not really. Let's go out to lunch." And what Chuck did was he said, "Look, I know that you're an engineer by trade, but I want to make an appeal to you. I want you to think about what technology might be involved that you think in moving a president from point A to point B." And when I started to think about that, that's really what did it and solidified it for me. So that was, that's a 7 or 8 minute answer to how I got from point A to point B. And as we go on in the conversation, I'm going to talk about, some of the things that specifically that Central Catholic did for me that I took with me in terms of principles, either to a division that I ran or to a White House job that I had, those kinds of things. So we'll just, we'll do it like that and kind of continue.
Sounds good. I have to make a note. It probably been about 4 or 5 years ago when I had first met you down in DC. I noticed that national championship ring you had on your finger, and I think that's how we met each other. Not sure if you're wearing it today, but not only were you quite the student, but quite the football player in your time, both here at Central and in college. So engineering, major background up to this point. Now we're transitioning into the Secret Service. 26 plus year career in the Secret Service. You've held multiple different positions, I think 10 in all. Can you talk a little bit about some of those positions that you held within the service? And then can you tell us a little bit about how the technology either changed or remained the same within those roles? And then, how did technology complement the work that you were doing in those roles?
Yeah, so I almost, coming into a law enforcement organization. And that's what the Secret Service is. I mean, Secret Service is an old organization, been around since 1865. And the Secret Service is unusual in that, what you don't realize is that how many offices there are. There are about 140 offices around the world. And there's, it's 8,000 people or so. And people typically don't associate investigations with the job. However, that's where most of the work takes place. And, the Secret Service comes out of an environment where most of these kinds of investigations were financially crime-based organizations. Now it's high-tech computer stuff, but it didn't start off that way. Started off with counterfeit money and then got into credit cards. And then, this other notion of computer intrusions. I used to say to myself all the time, why would you go into a bank and rob it when you could sit on the other side of the world and break into somebody's database and steal more money? So it's, there's been an evolution of that kind of stuff on the job. But I want to intertwine this into our conversation. There are two technologies that will absolutely change the world as we know it, and in a way are changing it now. One of the things that technology does is it enables this thing that we're addicted to that we don't realize that we're addicted to. Technology enables us to be addicted to convenience, right? So all of a sudden, you can touch a button on your phone and your meal shows up 20 minutes later. You can find and have access to almost anything in the world on this thing called a phone. And that phone that we all have in our back pockets, that's a rough equivalent of what NASA had in terms of supercomputing capability in the late 60s. Now it's in our back pocket. But all of these things have occurred, I don't want to say without our knowledge, but they've occurred in a way that we've gotten used to them. So what I would say is that we've become addicted to technology and convenience. And typically what happens is, I do cybersecurity. That's what I did in the Secret Service. We'll talk about that here shortly. But typically there's an inverse proportional relationship between convenience and good security. So when convenience goes down, good security usually goes up. And the converse is true. So when convenience goes up, good security goes down, right? So that's what has enabled things like hackers and the ability of us to use the same daggone password time after time after time. All right, enough of that. So the two technologies that are absolutely going to change life as we know it. One is here today, but not quite ready for prime time. Another one is here today and in use, but we don't realize it and it's misunderstood. But I promise you the convergence of these two technologies are life-changing. Number one is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is the ability of a computer to do runs or tests to find out whether something is true or not, whether that's really a cat, whether if the car is driving down the road, is that a stop sign? Is that a person? Have I been here before? Going to change the world as we know it, all right? That's ready for prime time and it's constantly getting better. If you don't believe me, is Siri better now than it was 5 years ago? Of course it is, but that's because of AI-powered things. The other thing that is going to absolutely change the world is quantum mechanical computing, right? It's not quite ready for prime time, but let me just give you a data point to let you know where we are. So if you give the most powerful supercomputer, the 10,000 year problem, meaning you give it a problem and it takes 10,000 years to solve that problem. That's with the most powerful supercomputer. So if you give that same problem to a quantum computer, that 10,000 year problem is solved in 200 seconds. That is astounding. And the merger of those two particular technologies will change the world as we know it. And so just to dig into this and to get all geeked out for a moment, quantum computers, regular computers work in this binary thing, on, off, high, low kind of thing, bits, bytes, digital word, and that's how it processes information. Quantum works on this thing called a qubit. right? So it means it can basically occupy two states at one time. There's this fancy word called quantum mechanical superposition, which just simply means that you can layer data in the same space and occupy those spaces at basically in two states at one time. But here's the problem with it. It has to be really cold. And I don't mean cold like in our refrigerators, like really cold. So it's probably going to be solved where we get room temperature quantum mechanical computing within the next 5 years. But those two things are going to change life as we know it. So let's get into some of the Secret Service jobs. I had 4 major technologically oriented jobs in the Secret Service. The first one was the National Cybersecurity Division. And that was immediately after 9/11. And so the job that I had was I had people from the intelligence organizations, CIA, NSA, and others, and the cops. The reason that I bring that up is because the intelligence people are very different than the cops. The cops want to go lock folks up. The intelligence people want to gather information. And prior to 9/11, you couldn't talk to each other, right? Intel folks wouldn't talk to the cops. Cops wouldn't talk to the Intel people. And there was a significant cultural barrier between the two. But I got to tell you about this one instance that I had, this job that I had there, that's interesting. There was an intelligence matter. I'm driving home and I'm the deputy director of the National Cybersecurity Division involving a protectee. And I don't want to say who it was, but the point is it's either the president or the vice president. And it's significant. I send it over to Secret Service headquarters and they give it to the protectee. I'm driving home, I get a call, and this particular protectee says, well, he doesn't say it to me, he says it to the leadership. Hey, get him in my office at 9 o'clock tomorrow. I want to talk to him about this. I can't tell you how unusual it is for a Secret Service agent to have to talk to a president or a vice president about an intelligence matter. This was the first time that like something like this, it certainly happened to me. And guess what? It's unusual. You could go 3 or 4 careers and never get this. So I go home and I'm studying everything about this subject. Why? Because you don't want to look like an idiot in front of the boss. And guess what? He is going to ask you questions. So I feel like this is a strange thing, but let's tie this back to Central. I'm in front of, the most powerful person in the world, and I'm briefing them about an intelligence matter. And I think I'm going to get like 10 minutes because that's all you ever get with these people. I got an hour. And I'm thinking, I don't want to embarrass Central Catholic. I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to embarrass my mom. I don't want to embarrass Montana Tech. I don't want to embarrass, because I want to have the answer to everything that protectee asked me. It's so unusual. And this was maybe the first time, and I'd finished my first doc in electrical engineering. This was the first time that I was able to leverage a pretty damn good education about cyber and technology talking to a principal. And the thing is, I got introduced in that meeting as the top cyber expert in the Secret Service. Thanks for the pressure, right? And I'm just sitting there thinking, what an unusual experience. But I felt like, we're playing Penn Hills. There's 30 seconds left. We're on the goal line. It's 4th and 1, and you get one shot at that, not to mess it up, right? And that's exactly what I felt like. So my point is that so much of the experiences that you get at Central, if you think about it, there's a tie that the institution is iconic. You don't want to let the institution down, right? And you don't want to let yourself down. And you said, well, what's the technology? How did things change? That kind of stuff. This was a cyber-oriented job. One of the things that's changed in cyber, and for federal law enforcement is gotten very good at adapting to the behavior of the bad guys, right? So this is right around the time when offensive cyber techniques are becoming emergent. It's illegal in the federal law enforcement space to do this, but it wasn't illegal for the intel community. And so I had a lot of engagement in that life and learning how to do, not learning how to do, but having an exposure to those kinds of things. And a lot of this is also driven by the military. So the way that they describe it is the ability to project force in cyberspace. This is another thing that's really going to be life-changing, because right now, if there's a kinetic threat to our country, we know what that looks like, right? But what does an active war look like in cyberspace? That hasn't been defined even today. It's a very, very nebulous and opaque subject, but for anyone who is thinking about a career in this kind of thing in cyber, this is a big, big deal. Particularly if you're thinking about a job in service to our country. There's so many opportunities that are available. Another job that I had was the Electronic Crimes Task Force. I ran 17 across the country. When I had that job, I don't know how many there are now, maybe there's 34, 35 on a worldwide basis. That job was all about trying to arrest people who had broken into things like financial institutions to steal data for monetary gain. That's a violation of the criminal law to be able to do that. That was a cool job, because you're trying to marshal resources around the country and keep field offices from fighting one another about who got a case. Another thing that demands leadership principles to be able to do that kind of work. Other job I had was a Deputy Chief Information Officer for the job. That's a different thing, because that's not necessarily a criminally oriented job. That's all about technology and cyber. How do you leverage technology, cyber resources, and budget to effectuate your mission, whatever your mission is? That was a cool job, and I learned a lot doing that job. And then probably in one of the most unusual jobs that I had in the service, and it was just a weird job, and a lot of life is timing, and you need to be lucky. And I feel like I had the right time and was lucky on a lot of occasions. But point is that the administration and the Obama administration, they wanted to increase technology in and around the White House. And in order to do that, they did not want anyone from the government to spearhead it. They were a big believer in the merger of private sector influence with government, because the private sector brings certain experiences and tools to government. So you may have heard of a guy named Zuckerberg, right? They reached out to him and in essence said, send us your top engineer, which they did. And they made him the first director of White House information technology, gave him the equivalent status of a 3-star general. But in association with that, they said the Department of Defense will provide a liaison to this person. The Department of Homeland Security, through the Secret Service, will provide a technology liaison to the White House director. That was me. And a lot of why it was me, I would love to think it was me and I did a great job, but in truth, it's probably you're in the right place at the right time, and like, hey, you try this until you bang it up, and if you bang it up, we'll get rid of you and get somebody else. But I didn't. So that was such an odd job, because technology is such a broad field. And so in that job on paper, I was responsible for the day-to-day operations of information security for the President of the United States. What's that mean? It means that you're trying to stop foreign threat actors from stealing his information. So think about what tools that you would need from a technological perspective to be able to do that. And think about the sophistication that a foreign threat actor would have to be able to steal stuff from you. That was a fascinating job, because we handled everything from anti-drone technology. Like, how do you technologically knock a drone out of the air, right? How do you do that? How do you even know it's coming? Like, those were the types of things that I was fortunate enough to be able to handle. And that also allowed me to continue to kind of run around the intelligence community, because a lot of this stuff is classified, dig into what the threat actors were doing, and then put into place countermeasures to be able to stop them. I mean, it was a fascinating, fascinating job to be able to do. And I was humbled and honored to do that for a couple of years. It was truly transformative. And when we get into the leadership component of our conversation, I'm going to talk about transformative leadership and how technology really is a central platform in that kind of leadership. And that's probably good for that area, unless you want to dig into something else about the Secret Service. Maybe you want to go into the private sector stuff.
Yeah, we'll move in that direction next. I mean, at this point, you've got an incredible career in the Secret Service, and 26 plus years, and have risen to incredible positions. How did that transition to the financial services sector take place, and what ways are the technology that you're currently using now similar, and what ways are the technology that you're using different in this financial services sector?
Yeah, so in financial services, there's a few things that I'm really, really big on mentorship. So it's your transition from point A to point B is a lot easier if you've got a support network that just sits down. It doesn't have to be anything formal. It can be somebody that you call just to bounce questions off, or you can make it formal if you want. I did some of those formalized programs in the Secret Service, but that's a really good way to make somebody feel comfortable when they're transitioning from A to B. And I had turned down a number of jobs just because I wasn't ready to go yet. There were a number of things that I wanted to accomplish. As I had not yet in the Secret Service, just things that I wanted to do. I probably need to back up for a minute because I want to talk about one specific technology. One of the things that I wanted to do that I was able to do, I was am, kind of like the whatever you want to call it, the progenitor, the architect of the Secret Service virtual reality program. I never did anything like that before. And I was able to put that into place. And that was incredibly transformative, because I remember saying to myself, if virtual reality can be used to do everything from train pilots to surgeons to NFL quarterbacks on whether it's a Tampa 2 or a cover 1 or whatever, I think that I can use this same technology to train Secret Service agents. And that was a big, big, big deal. Little bit of input, lots of output. And I was particularly proud to be able to put a stamp on that. We built a robot to do it. One of the things that you learn about VR, it is an experiential environment, which means when you see in the VR where you turn to the left, it feels like you're turning to the left. If I'm trying to teach agents how to respond to a certain place or do a certain thing, it feels like they're doing it without having to do it, all that kind of stuff. Okay, sorry, hard stop, and we'll go to the financial services stuff. Anyway, so what I tell you is that, number one, my general philosophy is whatever you did in your old job, it's nice that you're there, but what got you there will not keep you in your next one. So I've always been an advocate of continual learning. The first thing that I would tell you is that going from the government into the private sector, number one, you better understand that there's something called a P&L, which is a profit and loss sheet. So you better know how to read a balance sheet. The government does not run anything like that. You get money from the Congress, there's an allotment of dollars, you do the best that you can with what you have, but the government always has a battle between efficiency and equity. In other words, if I just wanted to go out and buy 200 cars like I did on the job, I've got to go to the GSA schedule, I got to buy like that kind of stuff. And, maybe I get a good deal on those, maybe that I don't, but I have to put out an RFP and all that other kind of stuff. In the private sector, I've got a little bit more latitude, and I really can do things that affect that profit and loss. And you have to understand that business revenue model is something that you didn't have to deal with before. So guess what? You need to learn that. The other thing that I've learned very quickly, and I knew this because of mentoring and that people helped me, in the private sector, security is a cost center. You're not a driver of revenue. So that should tell you something about where your placement is in terms of the hierarchy of the organization. I am collaborative as the day is long. I make recommendations. I have a say in things, and it's a say in things based on a risk-based analysis. And the conversation is very different than it was on the old job. The other thing too is I work in a regulated environment, which means I've got controls that I need to put in place. The controls are connected to audits connected to regulators, which is connected to bank examinations. You know, there's none of that in the Secret Service. But the point is, I know all that now, and I've learned it very quickly, but I try to put myself in a position to learn all those things. Okay, technology. Guess what? The old job, I had a lot of those techie type jobs that we were talking about, but the Secret Service was an on-prem organization, meaning all of the data sat in the data center downstairs, right? In the basement. We had custody of it. Guess what? Everybody's going to the cloud if you have any sense, right? So I had to learn about cloud computing. What's that mean? It means you got to go to AWS school and all this other kind of stuff. But that's what I mean when I say what got you to point A or what got you there won't keep you there in your next gig. So the point is you need to go learn that stuff. So I learned a lot about cloud computing and the why piece of it, the efficiency piece of it, learning to, in the middle of what I would refer to as an adaptive technology, you're adapting to a new environment, and cloud technology is not going anywhere. And in another 5 years, on-prem is going to be a dinosaur. Like no one's going to do, because for one thing, it won't make any sense to do it because you can't make the business case for it. It's all about an elastic environment and what I call, you pay by the drink, right? You only need this much storage space because you run a seasonal business, that's fine. You ramp up because you need more, that's fine. But the reason that you do that is because there's a demand and you're only paying for what you need. That's nothing like an on-prem environment where you're paying for services. You're always worried about patching and it's going to dump your system, like all of that kind of stuff. But what I've tried to learn is to be able to explain this to other executives who may be unfamiliar, because there's a significant security component. In my business, I'm the head of the cyber incident management office. And you got to worry about things like breaches and controls and all that other kind of stuff. So much of what I've done helped, but not all of it. And so maybe the first skill is learning, what do I know that what do I need to learn that perhaps right now I don't know, and you need to go get after that, and you need to be self-motivated to do it.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we can talk about technology, all day if we wanted to. I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk a little bit about the leadership that we've mentioned a few times. I mean, it's clear that leadership has played an important role in your life, rising to various leadership positions within the Secret Service to now leading a large division in one of the country's largest banks. I'm sure you've served under a number of different incredible leaders. How do you define leadership? What do you feel is the importance of strong leadership? And finally, what role does one's core values, like the values that were taught to you at Central Catholic, factor in all of this?
Yeah, so let me say from the outset, because I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. One of the things that Central Catholic does is, and that we need to continue to exemplify this as a message to either parents who are considering sending their young boys to Central. Our alumni already know this, but one of the things, Central Catholic is a leadership institution. And everything that I got from Central Catholic, Central begins to lay the groundwork and the ingredients of leadership. So discipline, rigor, structure, accountability, those are all of the things that you take into your leadership life. But much of those seeds are planted at Central Catholic, right? So I took those plants with me those seeds with me. I took them to the White House. I certainly take them to the private sector, but those started at Central, and that's really important. So to drive home to some of the alumni who are listening to this, was there ever a time that you sat in class and 15 minutes later somebody sauntered in with their tie not done and just sat down like everything was good? No, like that would happen like, oh, never, right? In my era, you'd have to go see Mr. Wheeler for that, right? Like it just didn't happen. But the thing is, you knew it didn't happen. And if you acted in a way that was outside of the boundary set of what was expected, there was something that, you had to go and pay for that, right? So there's accountability. And accountability and discipline and that structure, that leadership, that's an important platform that Central helps promote. And you take those things with you into your later life. So I just want to make sure that is something that's my perspective on what Central did for me, among many other things. But I was fortunate enough to be able to teach and lecture about leadership at the Naval Postgraduate School, at George Washington University, at Ohio Christian University, and at Johns Hopkins. And I've always kind of taught it the same way. Leadership typically falls into two buckets. It's very broadly defined, but it's transactional leadership and transformative leadership. Transactional leadership is kind of just what people think it is, right? It means that the organization that you happen to be running or you're a part of, it's doing swell, and you kind of need to just keep the trains running and do exactly what was done before you got into that leadership role. Maybe a tweak here, maybe a tweak there. But transformative leadership is leadership that you're saying there's something amiss, there's something wrong about this particular aspect of the organization that you're running, right? So it needs to be transformed from point A to point B. The way that I want to merge it into the conversation about technology is that much of technology is utilized to transform organizations. Much of transformative leadership is all about technology. So think about it, to give you a current example. There's this thing called a pandemic right now. So think about what the schools had to do in order to step up and effectuate leadership. What they had to do is they said, we got to get technology into the homes of our students, and we've got to train our students up on how to be learners in a virtual environment. Our faculty, how to do that. Like all of that kind of stuff, that transformation has been effectuated through technology. Here's the other thing that I'll say briefly, because I know we need to keep moving, about transformative leadership. Because it's different, and what you're really saying is that we need to be adaptive, you're going to take a lot of heat. Transformative leadership comes with, it comes with arrows in the front and in the back, because they'll talk about you when you aren't there, right? It's hard. So you just need to know, when you're trying to transform anything, it is a tough way to go. But you need to focus and keep your eye on the prize. There's lots of different ways to do that, but a lot of situations are helpful if you realize that going into this, it's an uphill, a tough sledding environment. But that's the way that I typically have approached that.
Thank you. Well, I know there's a number of folks on today joining us right now that can relate to those Mr. Wheeler stories. I'm for sure.
Yeah.
Sure of that. So we are coming to the end of our program here. Just kind of to wrap things up, as some final thoughts, can you tell us one thing that most people don't know about you, and maybe can you share a story with us from the Secret Service to kind of take into our closing?
Yeah, so let's do this. Easy day. Number one, I'm a great cook, but who cares about that? Number two, I love to be in the gym at midnight. Love it. I've always been a night owl. And number three, I still ride my skateboard. I was on the board a few days ago. And I think we've got a story, but I think we've got a story that's going to be queued up by a little video.
Yes, I'll go ahead and play that now.
Let's do it.
The agreement lays out a framework for the withdrawal of American forces in Iraq, a withdrawal that is possible because of the success of the surge. جنوده وجنود الولايات المتحدة والمدنيين أننا نقترب كثيرا. شكرا جزيلا.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
on that, I didn't talk about the other jobs. I spent 7 years on the president's counter assault team. That's like the FBI's hostage rescue team, or partners were the Navy SEALs, did some stuff with the Delta Force guys. The point is, so that was a secret trip to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I was a counter assault team commander on that trip. So let's take you into where I was. Put yourself right now in the quad at like the foot of the steps when you're getting ready to go into the building. And then that was at brother's residence. That's how far away I was, right? And I've got a team of, special forces guys, but it's probably fun to talk about the run up to that. That was a secret trip. It is impossible to move the president in secret, right? So for that trip, most of the time when the president leaves the White House, takes off in the helicopter, flies out to Andrews, gets on the big bird and flies out. This was a completely secret trip. So that means you can't tell anybody where you're going. We had, taken him, let's just put it this way, via other means than the helicopter. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, get on a completely dark Air Force One, take off. I remember I never talked to my mom about anything on the job, not really, right? But this one time, because you're going to a war zone, you never know what's going to happen. I remember calling her and going, "Hey mom, you might want to turn the television on in the morning." And of course, what'd she do? "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "Why are you calling me and telling me this?" Okay, whatever. But the point is that we get over there, and again, a completely blacked out Air Force One. You're leaving, or I'm sorry, you're descending into a war zone. I don't know if anybody on the Zoom call has ever been on a plane that has to do a combat landing and takeoff. It's not like flying in and out of Greater Pitt, trust me. So to land, it's not like that. It's like this, skeet, like that, right? But guess what? When you're on that, it's not like being at Kennywood Park. I mean, it is quite the experience, right? And what ends up happening is, when that happens, I can hear like some radio traffic, and I hear like, I thought I heard somebody say "shoe" over the radio. So I say, okay, let's move the team up. And I move from where the, referencing like where the school is, and I get closer to the door of the brother's residence. And then all of a sudden, I see this guy get exploded out of the door. Because the Iraqis had, you remember the old cartoons where you see somebody like Fred Flintstone throw a guy out of whatever? That's what it looked like, except this wasn't Fred Flintstone. He gets exploded through the door. Now, I don't want to go into how he was treated, not by us, but by the Iraqis after that. But let's just say it was unkind. And we'll leave it at that. But the point is, there was, in that incident, what we didn't realize, we were leaving and going to Afghanistan after that. And there's half the world still didn't realize that we were there. But once that happened and we had gotten back on Air Force One to go, to make that trip, we're watching the television cameras, and it's blasted all over the world. One little comment about Air Force One. Listen, I'm a Pittsburgh kid. So being able to do that and have those experiences, absolutely unreal, incredible. And here's the other thing about that. The people who fly on that plane are probably 5% of the people who are there to support that particular trip. Yeah, there's a lot of people that fly on it, but nothing compared to the greater extent of the people who fly there. But the point is, there's a lot that was done on that trip to kind of keep it, quote unquote, under wraps, right? And here's the takeoff. When you're leaving a combat zone, it's not like this. It's like this. Unbelievable. You might want to be sitting down for that, right? And then we go over to Afghanistan. The rest of the trip is incident free. But the reason that it's incident free is because all of the things that we put into place, many of which are technological that I don't want to talk about, but it's incident free about, it's incident free in regard to what we did to make it incident free. But that particular trip was astounding in terms of the aftermath of what happened. And it was cold. It was December. There were some other things that happened outside. You're feeling like it's a little bit of it was like the X-Files, because we had to go over a cliff for some particular reasons. A lot going on there. Here's the last thing that I want to say before we're done. Number one, thank you to Central Catholic for allowing me to do this. But I want to say this to everybody who's listening. Nothing that's good survives by virtue of being good. If you're listening, and my brother alumni, find a way to give back. Reach into your pocket, find a way to help. And it doesn't all have to be money. It could be your labor. But everything that we all got at Central, we want to make sure that Central is in the position to deliver that quality education and those services to generations of Central Catholic would-be alumni. So find a way to give back. If you don't know how to do that, call Brandon, and I'm sure he'll figure out something. Maybe it's volunteer your time at a football game at a concession stand. Maybe it's digging to your pocket, whatever. But the point is find a way to give back to our great institution. So that's what I got. I'm hopeful that this was fun. It was fun for me. And I don't know if we have time for questions or anything like that, but maybe not. But thank you very much for allowing me for the privilege and the honor to continue to contribute to our great school.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Dr. Layton, for always having time for us at Central Catholic. Your service to the school has been tremendous over the years, from being our first keynote speaker of our career day to now serving on our board of directors. So we can't thank you enough for all that you do for us. Thank you to everybody that joined today and tuned in at home. If for some reason you couldn't catch the whole session, it will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel and our social media channel. I hope that you'll tune in the future for some of our upcoming events. Our next virtual alumni mass will take place on Thursday, November 5th. Our next edition of the speaker series will take place on Wednesday, November 18th. Details will be available about that shortly. And then finally, happy to announce today that we'll be hosting a virtual turkey trot, 5K run/walk for our alumni, students, friends, and anybody that wants to participate on November 23rd through 29th. To learn more about those events, please visit Central Catholic Alumni Connect at centralalumni.com. Thanks again, Dr. Layton, for spending time with us. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their afternoon. St. John Baptist de La Salle, pray for us.
Pray for us.
Jesus in our hearts forever. Thank you.
Thank you.